Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, I just wanted to have a quick heads up before we start this episode. This is a special episode. We will have Yukai Chou back talking about the remote framework. And I wanted to give you a heads up because it is a little bit, longer. It's, of course, very different because we have already had Yukai Chou along. And, given this coronavirus environment as well, there might be some small glitches in the sound, but the full message of Yukai Chou is definitely there. His key lessons and learnings that we will get from this episode are definitely very, very deep. So I'll ask you to bear with us with these small things and as well with the length of the episode, which is a bit longer than a typical episode, but bear with us. I promise you it will definitely be worth it. You'll be learning a lot of interesting things from a massive expert, a keynote speaker like Yukai Chou. So I'll leave you with the episode. Engagers, we are back this week on Professor Game Podcast with a return guest and a very special one because Yukai is not only one of the world's most renowned gamification designers and consultants, he was also episode 1 of Professor Game Podcast. So Yukai, welcome back. Are you prepared to engage once again?
I am back and I'm prepared to engage.
Let's do this. If you want to have the episode with all the full questions, one of Yukai's more difficult moments, one of his huge successes, the explanation, of course, of the Octalysis Framework in a gist as well. All these things that we have, all his recommendations, they are definitely available on episode 001 of Professor Game Podcast. You can go there and get all of that. If you want, all of the sort of the CV of the presentation of Yukai, it's there. It's also updated now, of course, after a few years since we last spoke on the podcast. But today we're going to speak about something, that is very current and probably a little bit different from the typical topic that you might have heard at least Yukai talking about in the past, and it's about his new framework. It's the remote framework. Is that right, Yukai?
That is right. And what episode are we on right now?
This should be something like 133, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to be going live very, very soon because, again, it's very, time relevant as well. So quite a few episodes after.
You've been putting in some good work on these things.
Yeah, trying to do the whole gig. And I mean, talking about these frameworks, I heard at some point or read, I'm not sure where it was, that one of your sort of intentions was, or your life goals was developing hundreds of frameworks. Is that an appropriate quote here? And what is that about?
Yeah, so it's 100 framework to be exact. And basically, in my literature, my Octalysis Prime community, we have this thing called 10K HP, which stands for 10,000 hours of play. And in that, there's a way to do what we call the lifestyle RPG. So you kind of figure out what the game you're playing, and then your talents, and then your role in that game, and allies. So turning your life into an RPG game. And I was just demonstrating my own talents. So that's a whole different topic, but basically you figure out a bunch of talents, your top 5s. We call it the ring talent, and your number 1 is edge. So I'll look at my top 5 ones, and it strongly indicates that I have the talent to turn abstract concepts into visual models and tools. So I thought, hey, that'd be fun to have a goal where I use this talent more and I create more frameworks and models. I'm at maybe around 27, 28 right now.
Wow.
And the thing is, not that I can do this at that scale. So not about intensity, but as an idea. If Mozart, it was great at writing music, right? But if he only wrote one song in his life, that would be not very effective, right? Resource and talent efficient. So I thought, hey, if I have this talent, I should probably do more. And so I have some frameworks relating to corporate bureaucracy. I have some frameworks about leadership or networking. So I don't know if I'll ever create one that tops the Octalysis framework. We'll hopefully at least one gets close to it. I'm not sure. But the remote framework, and specifically it's called the Remote Work Cultural Framework, is the latest lineup in all these modeling.
Wow. Wow. So I would almost like to start referring to you as a framework creator. That could be one of your other titles as well. How do you do that? Like, how do you create these frameworks? Is it just, do you have some process, or it's just an idea that comes up and you sit down and type it? Like, what does it look like if you're, again, whether it's you're looking to create something new or whether it's an idea that just comes up? How does that work?
I think it's interesting because it took me some time to even realize this was a unique talent of mine. I think there's a few stories in my life where I just saw something that I thought was simple, but that seemed like their minds were blown away. And I'm like, that's really easy. I think I can do this too. But I think I've always been relatively good in visualizing things. So I think about all the things I was good at was when I was in school. So I was good at chemistry and chess and economics, and I ended up majoring in economics at UCLA. And they seem relatively unrelated, but they're all about visually understanding something that's rather abstract, and then even making them move and change in your head, right? Chemistry, usually it's all these circles and arrows, and chess is you got to plan moves ahead, think about where the queen can go and the bishop can go. And econ, you have to think about where the supply curve moves right, what happens, and all those things. So it seems like I do have some kind of talent towards things of that nature. So I think the process of it is always a bit different for each of them, but I think it usually starts off with a problem. So most of them, I think of, okay, well, there's a problem where there's something that I spend a lot of time thinking or tackling or working on, just like there's remote or corporate bureaucracy, or I think about, okay, what makes a great leader, or what skills do I lack as a leader? And then every framework's a bit different, but then, so some of them are 2x2s. So then it's to identify what are the relevant axes or relevant components. So in the case of remote and the Octalysis, the relevant components. And at the beginning, there might just be like a splash of concepts and ideas and words on a page. And then the next part is to start. Oh, and my other talent, the other thing in my ring talents is pattern recognition. So start identifying patterns and which ones are grouped together with other ones. So the categorization becomes better. So sometimes 2 or 3 of these splash ideas can be merged into one, or a few of them can be grouped together. And and then I think it slowly forms into a framework. I actually created maybe a model, but maybe more like a rubric of evaluating frameworks. So I also have this criteria of, okay, is it visual? Does it display anything non-obvious? Is it a tool? So some models you just look at and that's it. It just teaches you a lesson by just looking at it. Some of them you can play with it. You could change the shape and do things like that. So I think it eventually evolves into the end product. Some are just pretty simple, like a Venn diagram, and that one just teaches you, look, if you have A, you have B, and then you have both of you in the middle ground, and that's great. I think, so like a 3-circle Venn diagram I have. But so that just teaches you a lesson, right? But the other ones are tools that you can change. So again, there's no one format, but I think that's the pattern that usually comes out.
Wow, that sounds like very interesting. And of course, it seems like just as in most sort of, this does have a very important component of creativity. As in most creative endeavors, there might be things that are common between different ones of these, but there's also, things that are completely different, as you were mentioning. And something interesting when you started off, you said, like it took me some time to realize that this is something that is not easy for others. And I think this is something quite typical. I mean, there might be some people who just like to brag about things that they probably even don't have, which is the complete opposite. But like finding out your true gifts and realizing that they are gifts, I think it's kind of a struggle for many people. Have you found there's a way for, again, it could be a framework or something similar for people to sort of find out what those things are? This
is something difficult, right?
Yeah.
There's part of what I did to figure part of these out is what I call the 10,000 hours of play, lifestyle RPG, understanding your skills and talents. But that's just a tool to reflect. But the key thing is you need to have enough life experience. So I think it's very important for people to go out and try different things and learn different skills. And in a social setting, you should discover, hey, this is something you're talented at. It's when you discover other people don't do it as easily. Realize that as clearly. So do things, and it's really the more you spend time doing new things, learning new things, do new activities with other people, the higher the probability you'll have those moments where you discover you have a talent. But I it's kind of like an epiphany. It's hard to reliably recreate that whenever you want.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I've heard some people like making suggestions, which I'm not entirely sure that always work, as you were saying, like things like, say, like write down things that you think you're good at, and that's like really difficult to begin with. And then like ask people around you, like if you were to say, what is my biggest talent, what I'm able to do better than most people, what would you say that? And you kind of can get some feedback. I'm not sure it's always going to be really useful. So that was, I was personally curious as well as to how that came about. But it's true that the more you do things and the more I think it has a lot to do as well with sort of the feedback that you're able to capture from the reactions of people when you say things, maybe, or when you show things, or when you execute and come up with a product. That could be something that if many people are impressed, maybe that kind of could be a clue to continue researching, right?
Yeah. So because one example, I guess, to add more clarity to this, digging down the path. When I was a student at UCLA, I signed up to this professional event, and just professional networking, and people there were, often twice or thrice my age. And I was just, the eager young person trying to meet people and learn and maybe get my name out there. And I just saw two people who were chatting, and I just walked by and I was curious what they're talking. And one was showing and I forgot what it exactly was, but it was like they were showing a 2x2. And they're like, oh, look, if you're in this quadrant, you're blah, blah, blah. If you're in this quadrant, you're blah, blah, blah. And this other guy says, oh, wow, did you create this? And he's like, oh, no, I wish I did. It's this other brilliant genius person who created it. And then I looked at him like I said, this is really simple, right? And it's just by pure luck, I walked by that and I realized, wow, they're really impressed with this. And it seems pretty straightforward. So I can do something like that. And so all I did was I signed up to a networking event without knowing what I was trying to get out of it. But if you're always doing the same repetitive, monotonous things every single day, then it's very hard to have those type of experiences. Actually, back then, I had a calendar book where, one thing is every day I had 3 columns. One was what I plan to do today. Second was, what hours do I plan to do everything, and the third column is how I actually spent those hours on. But then there's another, summarized calendar page that has all the calendar dates, and every day I would write down one thing that I've never done before. So it could be reaching out to a mentor or, going to this networking event. So I wanted to make sure that my life doesn't get too repetitive. I'm always doing at least one new thing every day. And I think that may have helped me get to this point.
That makes a lot of sense. And we've been talking about going around this whole thing about the frameworks in general, like your life goal of having those hopefully 100 frameworks, which you seem to be in a pretty good path if you have already over 25, for example, because I know that this has intensified in the last years. And, you're just multiplying that times 4. Of course, the difficulty might be either increasing or decreasing depending on what that looks like, because there are more and more things, but of course you're also getting more and more practice as well. So I'm not sure what that'll look like, but I do hope that you have the chance to develop those, and especially as you were saying, to get the chance to make them as useful sort of to mankind as the Octalysis. Because if you're in gamification and you haven't heard of the Octalysis or Yukai Chou, you probably either don't know too much about it, or you still have to do some more research for sure, or talk to other people as well. So getting into the remote framework, was there a situation that brought you into this? How did you come up with this framework, and how long has it been around your head? How long have you been using it?
Okay, so I started my first company in 2005, and from that point on to today, there's only been a year and a half that I actually had a physical office working physically with coworkers, and that's when one of my startups raised a bit over $1 million, and we had this fancy office and people came in. Beyond that, more than 13 years of those have always been remote with people in different countries. And it has always been my norm. And I always thought it's pretty natural. There's people that I felt closely bonded with, and I've been working with them for a year and a half. And I remember we finally had a physical meeting, which was happening in Germany. And then the whole team was playing a game guessing if he was a short guy or a tall guy, because we've never seen him in person. We always just see his webcam. So I thought, build bonding and having a great team culture and having but I noticed also people in my team, they take sacrificial activities for each other because they're just seen as lifelong friends. They bond well. And then this COVID-19 scenario came in. And then I started noticing that, wow, companies are struggling. They're panicking. They don't know how to do this remote thing. I think maybe a lot of people who listen to this podcast were kind of familiar with it, but majority of corporations and companies, they just can't fathom, how do you get work done when you work remotely? And also, how do you keep a culture in place? There's a ton of corporate workers where if the boss is like not showing up today, he's working from home, everyone starts slacking off, right? And I know a lot of pretty hard workers too. They'll say like, oh, tomorrow I'm working from home, so I can do this and this and that and this and this and that. I was like, wait, are you working? Why do you have so much time when you're working from home, right? And so I think companies are aware of this. So they're really wondering, okay, if people are consistently working from home, are they getting anything done, right? And also, how do you actually maintain culture and citizenship? And this is a term, corporate citizenship, which just means people just do genuine good things that are not within their job description to help the company and the community, or not the community, the workplace, quote unquote. So I noticed there's this pain. I realized that I've been doing this for a long time, and I wanted to be helpful, especially during this time when every company needs a lot of help. I think there's also, that's from a just, hey, want to be helpful. There's also this angle of, hey, how do we still stay relevant, right, in this time? Because a lot of companies may think, oh, well, everything else is on pause. Gamification may be a lower priority, and we got to cut costs, and we got to figure out what is. So I'd also say that it was a strategic move from, hey, I want to create something useful. I want me and my company to be relevant in this scenario. We're not just saying the same things we were 3 years ago, but we would say, hey, we have other things that can be helpful. And a lot of the framework is some of the things I intuitively know how to do. But when people ask me, how do you figure these things out? I'm like, I don't know. I just have a lot of experience. And breaking that down into a process, a system, a model, so everyone can learn it and follow the steps and get better at it. So I just started to think about what are the things that have been very important and instrumental in the past. And I've learned from a lot of mistakes in the past, and so what are things that could have prevented those mistakes? And it was nice that at the end it actually became an acronym, remote. And we can even talk about, for instance, why the second E is expression and the last E is enjoyment, as opposed to the other way around. But yeah, that's why I thought that was what motivated me to create the remote framework.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there any particular sort of mistake that you learned from that then led you in a different direction that you can sort of recall that you can share with us?
I think one of the very big ones, because there's some small ones, like for instance, the third component, or we call them elements. The third elements in remote is momentum, which is the third letter. REMM is momentum. Momentum is really just all these productivity tips in terms of, and also triggers in your environment that make sure you focus on doing your work well. So that's a constant lesson over the past decade, right? How to just be less distracted, focus on your work. So, but there's no big thing like, oh, I made a huge mistake. I mean, unless you talk about, I decided that I would play one game, a 20-minute game, and then I'll go back to my work and it end up being closer to 9 hours. I mean, that I guess you could say that's a big mistake. Yeah, and frankly, the momentum component of this teaches you how to defend against that. But I think the big one is, openness, which is the fourth element. I think, and openness has two components to it. It's vulnerability, personal vulnerability, and also corporate transparency. And I think I've probably been pretty good with the personal vulnerability, which is, encouraging people to be more vulnerable, share how they feel. And it usually starts off with the leadership, right? Leadership has to show some vulnerability and some of the human side. But I think the transparency is something that is harder. And this is because in a face-to-face setting, it's easy to just walk to someone and talk, right? Or you bump into people and you talk and you can hang out. But in a remote work environment, you only initiate a conversation when you need to make a point, right? You send an email to communicate a work activity, or you set up a meeting to figure something out. And so there's a lot of things that, hey, we could share, we could talk about, but why would we schedule a separate meeting just to talk about it? And that, I think, created some problems in the past, where also as the CEO of my startup, I've always been balancing this thing about, okay, well, and this might be really relevant to people today too, if the company is not going so well, right? Let's say you might run out of money in a month or two, right? It's a valid question to say, all right, do you let everyone know? And let's say you're trying to raise the next round of funding, and your goal is to raise that round of funding, before this month or two runs out, right? There are really two options. One is to, hey, let's tell everyone, hey, we only have 1 or 2 months left, and after 1 or 2 months, if we don't raise funding, we're going to die. You guys don't have jobs, right? And so there's a +1 in transparency or +5 in transparency, but then there's a problem with it. Now people they're already stressed with their daily tasks. Now they're overly stressed. Sometimes that emotional stress can weigh people down. Some people might think, oh, well, then maybe I should be looking for my next job. I should update my resume and not work so hard, when we really need people to push the hardest during this time, right? And the other one is to, just keep the momentum going and just, have people focus on their tasks. And then, fingers crossed, hopefully we'll cross that threshold and raise money. And so I think maybe 10 years ago when I was running a startup, I made the mistake of doing the first one, like not let people worry. And it wasn't I wanted to hide it from them. I just thought, as the leader, I should carry all this emotional burden. People shouldn't worry about this. But then it didn't work out the way we wanted. And then it just became a sudden news that we were running out of money. And then people, it was a shock to many people. And I thought that was a regrettable thing. I thought that was.
Yeah, like people felt like betrayed or something like that, right?
Well, the specific emotional story was, we realized that at one point that, okay, we have to shed things off. And so there were 4 interns from Berkeley. They were driving to the office from Berkeley, which is a 40-minute drive. And I called them and they're like, oh, we're sorry you're late. We're going to be there in 20 minutes. And I literally said, no, don't come, go back, because we're shutting things down. And they were so disheartened, And I also made a big mistake, by the way, at that point. So this is not even remote, right? This is like face-to-face things. I made a big mistake at that point because I didn't want them to waste the 40 minutes. So I just told them to turn around and go back home. But for something this important, and again, this is my lack of experience, right? I very much regret this. I think for something this big and important, it is important for them to show up, speak face-to-face. I mean, in remote, you want to do it remotely with a video call, right? But face-to-face, tell them, hey, because of these reasons, we're shutting down, and have some closure, explain, answer questions, as opposed to doing something so abrupt. And I was only thinking about not wasting their time. But again, I failed miserably on the openness aspect, and that's something I still regret today.
I'm sure. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. So Yukai, we've been talking about this whole thing, but I'd like to get into sort of the gist of what does the remote framework stand for? If you can provide any examples or something like that. Can you tell us what is this whole, because I know there will be many places where we can find this, and we'll probably talk about this in the end as well. But can you give us sort of the audio version of the remote framework?
Okay. So most people know the remote framework, know the remote acronym. But there's 3 actual components. There's the 6 elements, and then there's the 3 stacks, and then the 2 outcomes. Okay. So I'll start with the main thing, which is the 6 elements, which is the acronym remote. So basically, remote is broken down into 6 components that I think are very important in remote work. And they all lead to the 2 outcomes. And the 2 outcomes are specifically productivity and workplace morale. So these are the two things that come out if you do these 6 steps well. So the first one is responsiveness. And basically it's, when you send out a message, you have some kind of communication, how easy or quickly you can get communication back. And in a physical office setting, the responsiveness is very high. Like I said, you can easily walk to someone's desk and chat. And so this is good for productivity, right? And when you bump into people at the water cooler or hang with coffee, that's good with workplace morale. And, when you're in a remote setting, you send an email, right? And then receive the email back. And then you reply to the email now or a few hours later, a day later, and then you receive it later. So there's a couple of big issues with this. Number one is it feels like you're distant. It feels like you're far away. And eventually things like that, people start feeling like, every email is just a to-do list, not actually a human being. It's just, characters and letters. And the other thing is things slow down a lot, right? In local setting, you walk to someone and says, hey, what do you think about this? They'll say, oh, I think this. Oh, but don't you think this? Oh, yeah. And then you could have a conversation in a minute and a half. But in that flow of sending an email and waiting a day before it comes back and forth, that minute and a half becomes 1 or 2 weeks, right? So that responsiveness is very low. And also we know from a behavioral science standpoint, which of course is part of my background, if we do an action and the feedback, whether it's emotional or not, comes back immediately, then our brain feels more rewarded and we're more likely to do this action, to take this action, which means that now we're only sending out emails or sending chat messages or scheduling a call when we absolutely have to, as opposed to when we think it's useful. Oh, and so when we talked about the 3 stacks, right? So every one of these 6 elements would have 3 stacks applied. And this one is tools. What are the tools you should use? Then there's the culture. What is the culture that needs to be set up to be able to effectively increase, let's say, responsiveness? And the third one is triggers. How can you have the right triggers to bring this up? So for some tools, make it easy. They're persistent rooms. You can always jump in and have a conversation. One of the big things I talk about in responsiveness, don't be afraid to just say, hey, let's jump on a call to figure this out. There's so many times you have a back and forth in email or Slack or chat, Skype, whatever you're using, and then you just back and forth, typing. And then some of the best conversations ever was either that person just calls you, like ring, ring, ring. It's like, oh, hey, and then you laugh because like, oh yeah, we should have done this a while ago, right? We just spent the last 20 minutes typing, right? And I think that's good responsiveness, right? That and you improve that, you feel like you're co-working quickly with each other, and I makes up a lot of the disadvantages of a remote setup. There's a lot of advantages, we don't have to go into that, but yeah, I think it's to take advantage of the advantages while diminishing the disadvantage. So stuff like this helps. So the second element in the remote framework is expression. So this is basically allowing people to express their uniqueness. And this goes back to what I said in terms of when you're working remotely, every person on the team could just feel like a name, an email, a task, and you don't really feel bonded with your teammates. And most companies know, hey, team bonding is good for culture, and culture is good for, all these things. But even if you're the most just numbers-driven person, having better bonding between employees decreases turnover, and turnover costs a lot of money. So it's good to have that bonding.
This is a difficult one to sort of understand, usually for many corporations, how turnover is actually a cost, and it's not just like, he or she left, let's find somebody else.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of studies out there that quantify, each turnover at least costs $150,000 for a corporation in terms of the drop task, the replacement fee, and just all those things. I mean, it is a big cost. So, and usually when someone else has to pick up their responsibilities for the next 2-3 weeks, there's a lot of psychological stress and workplace dissatisfaction, which leads to more turnover, or just your employees are psychologically ill, which means they're not as functional. So there's a lot of cause for turnover. But it's funny because some things is just kind of obvious to me or people I know, but then I realize a lot of times you kind of have to spell out everything.
Yep. For
like, let's say a corporate decision maker, let's say. So when it comes to expression, it's basically giving people tools and create a culture of you're allowed to express yourself. So that's why, in one sense, it's so successful because of all those emojis that are, that are GIF animations. It's like fun. It's like all over the place, right? It's kind of wacky and crazy. And so you get to understand how different people, you choose as different ones, and they're different. I think Zoom has the function of you don't even need a green screen. You can load whatever background video behind you in your background or image. And so you allow people to express yourself a little bit better. So I think having that level of expression, just like, oh, everyone's unique, everyone has their own quirks and they love this, they do that, and you feel like these are human beings that are unique and interesting. So that's expression. The third one we kind of talked about, that's momentum. And momentum, again, is the peer productivity stuff. Like when you are at your home, and we know this about behavioral triggers, your bed is constantly triggering you to go rest and lie down, even if you're not thinking about it. As long as it's somewhere in your eyesight, your subconscious mind is processing that. Your TV, right, is triggering you to go watch TV. So there's a lot of distractions. And also, you're competing with a lot of games and Netflix, right? When there's no manager watching over your shoulder, it's easy to just get distracted pretty easily and not focus on your work. And most people, it's not even they want to slack off, right? Plenty of us have our own goals that we want to do, but then we get distracted. So momentum is all about setting up the right triggers, the right environment, understanding those. For instance, BJ Fogg tiny habits comes into play. The getting things done literature comes into play. I have my own thing. It's also one of my other frameworks called the lifestyle inertia design, which is the concept is, hey, if you design your day-to-day lifestyle correctly, then you actually become productive through inertia. So you don't need discipline. You don't need like, oh, I need to focus on this. Just like, oh, you just naturally get things done. And for instance, one of the components is what we call the ramp up, which is an activity that easily leads to another activity. So some people, they'll say, hey, like my example, I'll just play a quick game and I'll go back to work. And then you realize playing a game is a terrible ramp up to doing work. Usually playing a game is a ramp up to playing more games. And then after those games, like, I'm tired, I want to go sleep now, right? And then maybe you'll discover, so it's different for each person, like, oh, maybe reading a book is a good ramp up to getting some work done. And taking a nap, and taking a walk is a ramp up to reading a book. So you can start building those ramp ups and so one that naturally leads to another and get more work done or whatever you want to do finished. So that's momentum anyways. Openness, we talked a little bit about that. So openness is basically, so that's the fourth element in remote. And again, it's basically personal vulnerability and transparency. And I think, like I said, the issue is just, if it's not important, if it's not related to a task, you don't communicate. And I think openness is removing that. So we talked about corporate transparency. I think a lot of companies are aware that's very useful and important for employees to trust their employers and their leaders. That's important. But I think having employees trust each other is another thing. And there's a lot of studies that show that, hey, when you are opening up, you're showing your vulnerabilities, people end up trusting each other. And that's when, again, they'll take sacrificial actions for each other. As I was designing this framework, an interesting thought came to mind. Do you know, at least in the US, a very popular game called Truth or Dare?
Yes, I know it. At least it's just a quick explanation for the audience is, you're playing, you're taking turns, and the person whose turn it is decides if he wants to tell some truth that this person will be asked, or a dare that this person will be asked to do. That's correct, right?
Pretty much, yeah. So I was always wondering, Truth or Dare game is so popular, and I really don't like to play it because I always feel like it's like a poison picker design. You're just choosing between bad options in my mind. But what I realize is that, and it's such a popular bonding game, is because people bond when they share vulnerable truths, right? Personal truths. However, most people don't want to share it. So therefore, it is anchored on something that is scarier, which is dare, right? Dare would be, hey, run out on the street naked for 10 minutes or throw this pie in someone's face, right? And so you don't want to do dare at all. So you choose the lesser of two evils, which is truth. And because you chose truth, you have to tell the truth. And therefore, this game gets people to share things they otherwise wouldn't share with people. And that's why people bond very well with it. I'm not saying corporations should play truth or dare, with their employees, but it just was an interesting realization. And this is actually an interesting leeway into the next one, which is T, the team play. So T, which is the fifth element, is team play. And it's setting up little activities or even gameful activities, or it could be games, little mini games between employees, or employees can self-organize these. That's what happens with my company. To just have them experience some activities together that are fun. They get to see what each other's like in flow, some unique talents and whatnot, and they can bond better too. So that's team play. And in team play, I think picking a game, picking the right type of activity game is very important. There's a lot of, let's say, board games and card games, and again, you can experience those all online these days, that are about like deceit. Right? Oh, there's one person who's the villain. Everyone has to guess, and the villain has to pretend he's the good guy. I don't recommend this for a company environment, because sometimes what you'll see is that I'm trying to guess who the bad guy is. And I say, hey, is it you? And he's like, oh, no, of course it's not me. I'm a good heart person. Yeah, you look so innocent, and you've always been like an honest person in the company. So I trust you. It's not you. Who else? Who is it? Right? And at the end of the round is like, haha, it is me. You all got tricked. It was me. And then I know some people like, wow, that's crazy. I did not even know this person was like capable of such deceit. So and literally like next time oh yeah, I'm just being. I was like, wait, but I remember the last time you showed this face in a game, you were lying. So I don't know about this time. So I actually don't recommend these deceitful games. What I recommend is team collaboration games, and you kind of have to. The win state is a bonding moment. So, for instance, there are various games online that are like, and there's different names for this, but basically, one person is drawing. He sees a word, and then he draws something on the board. And then on the other end, let's say 4 other coworkers are seeing it, and they're trying to guess what he's drawing, like typing, like, oh, is it a fish? Is it a sail? Is it whatever? And then whoever guesses right first is the winner, right? This is a very interesting game because, first of all, it's fast. I mean, you don't want people playing games all day long, right? It's fast. And what's interesting is that I've experienced myself when sometimes you're seeing a very abstract, like cousin. How do you draw a cousin, right, in a minute? It's such a hard word to draw. And then you're drawing random stuff, and you're like, oh, I'm so stuck. I have no idea. What I'm drawing is crap. It's like we failed, right? And then someone guesses cousin, and they win. And then you're like, wow, someone looked at the crap that I threw on the board that literally it just sucks, and they knew what I was thinking. What I was trying to say. And then you feel understood. You feel like you're emotionally connected to this person. It's a great moment. And a lot of times these games, when there's like at least 3 people in the room, these moments happen a lot actually. So and then there's all these 8 core drives, right? There's core drive 3, empowerment of creative feedback. There's social influence, core drive 5. There's core drive 7, unpredictability and curiosity. So this is all referenced into my Octalysis. And those are all the right brain, what we call the right brain core drives, which symbolically represents the emotional brain and intrinsic motivation. So there's having employees do these type of activities are very useful. We also have, mini kind of like Toastmaster series. And then there's times where we have little debates where we have a topic and then we assign these sides to the teammates and they have to practice debating. Some of them are practicing how do you answer questions from very tough clients that are like pushing at your throat. Sometimes it's how do you do an icebreaker about what defines you? So all those things I think improve chemistry and what it is like, it improves team play when you are working on something important together. So the last and final element in remote, which is another E, is enjoyment. And so this is basically saying you should gamify your task and your work so that it feels exciting and interesting. So first of all, why is this important? Well, like I said, it's because there's 2 things. Number one, when you're working remotely, there's a lot of convenience, but sometimes there's this loneliness, there's this isolation and depression. And so you just feel sad working by yourself. And the second thing is that, like I said, there's a lot of distractions. You're competing with, your work is competing with games and Netflix and all these other distractions. And so I believe if you gamify your work and your tasks well, which is not, again, putting points and badges on boring activities. Like, hey, do this boring activity 1,000 times and we'll give you a badge, right? This does not work in games and it does not work in gamification. But it's making the activities more enjoyable through those three core drives I mentioned, right? Empowerment, creating feedback, giving people ways to express themselves better, meaningful choices, autonomy. Core drive 5, social influence. So it's designs where there's collaboration, competition, social appreciation, gifting, things like that. And then core drive 7, unpredictability and curiosity, which is there's a lot of surprise moments, there's delightful, Easter eggs and whatnot. So when your activities have these things, one, you feel happier working on them, doing these activities. So even core drive 2, development accomplishment, right? As you're doing your task, there's better feedback that says, hey, good job, you just did it. Hey, you progress more, or we noticed that you're actually really good at this, or you're faster than 80% of people who tried this, right? Anything like that makes you feel better. So that helps with the isolation and psychological depression aspect. And then because the activity is more fun, now it's hard to make your work more fun than League of Legends, let's say, or Candy Crush, depending on who you are. But of course, we all know that we should get our work done. So, whereas a lot of these games could be a distraction to get our work done. So as long as those activities are more fun and more engaging than usual, people will still try to obviously do the work that they find pleasure in, as opposed to uncontrollably just play these games. So I think it is important for companies to think about how to gamify their workflow to make it enjoyable and interesting, so you make people feel happier and more focused on the work itself. Yeah, so that's kind of, again, summarizes the 6 elements of remote. And then we got, like I said, for each of these 6, we think about the 3 layers, right? The stack, which is the triggers, the tools, and the culture. And so all of these is like, what are the right tools to do these things? What are the right triggers to make these things more, let's say, frequent? And then the third one is culture. How do you set an environment in terms of how people behave, the social norming to make these things common? And then finally, like I said, there's the 2 results, which if you do all these things well, then I believe you will have a much, much higher level of productivity as well as workplace morale.
Absolutely. It seems like it's sort of in a way, I was going to ask you, one of the things I had thought before is, does this have anything to do with gamification? And especially with the last 2 you mentioned, it certainly does, but also sort of this focus on what are the results, I think make a lot of sense, and how this motivates and creates a culture and sort of a behavioral response from the team. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely.
And so the other thing I wanted to, because it seems to me like this is sort of geared towards people who are sort of the owners or the managers of teams to apply this framework, but does it also maybe apply to you as an individual member of your team, or should it be something that is mostly the top down? How do you view that in that sense?
I think it's across the board. As long as you as the individual also want the 2 results, which is more productivity and more workplace morale. I mean, teachers have said they found this really valuable for their remote teaching. And a lot of that's captured in the cultural layer, right? Responsiveness, just having the tools is enough. It's like, hey, if you want to feel like there's this responsive culture, when you get a message, you should respond fast. You shouldn't wait for so long. If you look at World of Warcraft, right, there is this, it's an add-on. A lot of things on World of Warcraft are add-ons, but there is one where if someone messages you, and let's say you're fighting this raid boss, which sometimes could take more than 10 minutes. It automatically sends a message to that person who writes to you saying, "Oh, your friend Yukai is doing this raid boss right now, and the boss is at 47% health, right? So I know, oh, Yukai's not ignoring me. He's just doing this raid. And actually, when the fight ends, it'll be another automated message like, hey, Yukai succeeded and beat the raid boss in 7 minutes, or Yukai failed. The boss beat everyone at 12% health. So this is a great example of responsive. I sent a message and I immediately got feedback saying you're not available, and I know why, right? So in the responsive culture, when someone sends you a message, you could be like, oh, I'm busy. I'll do other things and I'll finish my meetings and then I'll get back to it, whenever I'm available later in the afternoon. And that, decreases responsiveness, right? So it would be a good consideration to say, all right, let's at least respond quickly, say, hey, can we talk in the afternoon?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I think this is something that the whole team has to come together and work together to make this remote thing work. Now, The leader should be very proactive about this and guiding the team on this, but it's a team effort to make remote work.
It definitely is, because again, as you were mentioning, if you're talking about a team precisely, it's about everybody who is there participating. So Yukai, I've had at least myself a great time. I think this is a very valuable tool and a very valuable framework that many people can be using, especially in these days, as you mentioned, even, people who are teaching. This could be leaders of companies. This could be leaders of small teams. There's like a lot of application to this. And I'd like to know if people, of course, want to know some more, because we only have so much time and it's only possible to do so many things on audio. If people want to find out more about this framework, where would you lead them to, of course, besides your social media and so on?
Right now, unfortunately, it is just in social media. Right now, the most comprehensive, if you consider blogging social media. So right now, the most comprehensive literature on the remote framework is on the Octalysis Group blog. So I'm working with my managing director, Joris Bierda, and writing a series of those. So we've covered in depth REMO, and we still have team play enjoyment to go in depth for. But there's an intro one that just covered a lot of things I just mentioned in this conversation. I also started analyzing tools. So okay, which are the best tools for responsiveness? And then we'll see how quickly I get the other ones out. By the way, Zoom is a strong word in responsiveness. So, and in actually many of these components, there's a reason why Zoom is having its level of market share. But of course, as we know, it also has its flaws, and that it's trying to fix urgently right now.
Absolutely. And in my current teaching, we've had quite a few challenges where I have used with clients Zoom a lot, but I also, with my teaching, given the tools available at the university, we use Adobe Connect, which again as well has its ups and downs as any other tool. But Zoom seems to have some things figured out that many others don't. However, of course, the current demand right now, I think, is getting all these tools bring up some flaws that typically would not have been there, because, you don't expect from one day to the next to have 10 or 100 times more demand than you had, and systems can only hold as much as they can, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the way to find more about this, the best place at this point is go to octalysisgroup.com and then jump on the blog, and you'll find a series of these blog posts.
Definitely. And where can we? I know we had it on the last time, but where would be the best place to find you, to maybe ask you questions or follow the work that you're doing? Which would be the best place on whether it's social media? I don't know. Where can we do that?
A few places are relevant. You can tweet me at Yukai Chou. You can write me an email at the address yukai@octalysisgroup.com. The place that I pay the most attention to is right now my education mentorship platform called Octalysis Prime. So we have a Slack. People message me there. I respond quickly there. And then people message me also on the platform. But again, that's something you have to kind of sign up. It's a freemium, so you can sign up without a credit card. But it's still more frictions. So Twitter and email could be okay too. I just get a lot of those, and I missed many.
The typical thing that can happen. Absolutely. So thank you very much, Yukai, for investing this time today with the engagers. I hope this can reach many, many people in our audience and beyond, definitely, because I do think it is not only relevant, but also it seems to be very, very deep. I mean, it's something that I have to myself get into analyzing more and more, because I do reckon that whilst I have done some remote work, most of my, opposed to your experience, most of my experience has been mostly face-to-face. And I won't say I'm struggling with the remote work right now, but I do know that there could be a lot more that could be done. It could be done a lot better. And I definitely have to deep dive into this quite a bit more. So thank you very much for this time today, Yukai. However, for now, and at least for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Game over.
Hey, engagers. Thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast, and I hope you enjoyed the special interview with our repeat guest, Yu-Kai Chou. I wanted to know if you enjoyed this kind of episode. We every now and then, as you know, we jump into different topics. Today it was about the remote framework by Yu-Kai Chou, where we were talking all about working remotely. And in that same line, I'd like to know if you have any future guests, any future questions actually that you would like to ask future guests. All you have to do if you have questions, or even if you want to propose a new topic, something that you want to make sure that we discuss, is you can go to professorgame.com/question and there ask your question, or even again, propose that new topic. If it is selected, and there's a very high chance that it will be selected eventually, it will come up in a future episode and I will let you know so that you can get your answer. But before, of course, you go into your next mission, I want to make sure that you are listening and you're available for our next episode. So please go ahead and subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.